a child of God not committing sin, a person who is born of God, what do you think it was actually talking about? You know, that is a subject that you can't just go to 1 John 3:9 and take the passage right there and have all of the answers in one verse. And that's why he was confused. He wanted me to weigh in on it, not because he really wanted to mess with me or wanted to aggravate me or anything like that. He really genuinely was trying to get at, what does it mean? Well, I couldn't get him to reason when I brought up 1 John 1, 8 and 9, that if you say that you don't sin, then you are actually deceiving yourself and the truth's not in you. I could not get him to reason, but tonight I think we can reason together. Let's begin with James 1:13, and let's talk about sin in the Christian's life. Immediately you might be saying, well, how can we talk about sin in the Christian's life? Because Christians, they can't have sin in their life. Did you not just hear what said in 1 John 1? Let's go back to our Bible program right quick, and let's look at this. In 1 John chapter 1, let's get this in front of us. I don't know who's teaching whom when you really get down to it. If we say have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Let's get this as large as we can. 1 John 1, verse 8. If we say we have no sin, I don't want to admit that I have sin. That's what a lot of people say. People, I would say, don't want to be transparent because of how they feel about sin in their lives. Listen, folks, if you're not going to be transparent, you're going to die. What does that mean? If you're not going to be transparent, if you're not going to allow people to actually be able to review you, then the chances are you're just simply going to die on the vine, because this is how we sustain ourselves, is being reviewed by each other and be willing to be reviewed by each other. Now you might be saying, well, that kind of sounds like Galatians 5. You're asking me to allow myself to be devoured if we don't live a certain way, or if we don't be careful, we'll bite and devour one another. That's not what we're talking about. It may be the way it is in the church where you're in, but not really when you're being transparent. So what are we talking about? Let's look at this. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. Now, this is an extremely important passage because individuals oftentimes blame God for what they're going through. They end up feeling that they're being tricked by God or whatever. It just really is amazing the different things that people will say or do feel about God, when really God is the one that is trying to help us, and the problem isn't God, it is what we have been taught about God. Next verse. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Now, that's the problem that we end up having. I don't want to talk about that. Every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Why do you not want to talk about that? The reason I don't want to talk about it is because I don't want anyone to know what is happening with me. If no one knows what's happening with you, what about when something is happening with you? What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to handle that myself. No, that is impossible. Number one, you need Christ. He is our mediator. Number two, if you're struggling, how are you going to make it through that struggle when the devil is actually working on you through your own desires? What does that mean? I don't want people to know about my desires. Excuse me. We're all living in the same kind of body. We all know that we have different desires that we're having to fight. Whether it has to do with, just let's say, food desires. You think people can't tell when you're having an inordinate food desire? People can tell that. Well, what about when you have a desire for burning your money up? Well, who has a desire to burn their money up? Let me just see if I can animate that. This right here. That's desire to burn your money up. No, that's not desire to burn your money up. Well, it may not be desire to burn your money up, but that's what you're doing. And so you need help with that. Well, no, you talk about me smoking, I'm going to get mad. See how that works? That isn't how you get better. How you get better is trusting that you can get better. And see, most people think about sin in such a way that they don't really think that they can get better. Stay with me. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin bringeth forth death. Now, looking at that, you might say, no hope. When lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. I know that I'm going to end up sinning sooner or later. And so basically what you're saying is brings forth death. Well, you know what? I don't know if you quote that verse like that or not. A lot of people do. A lot of people have learned James 1:15, and they have actually learned that sin brings forth death. That is not what the verse says. It says, when it is finished, then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. When it is finished, bringeth forth death. Sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. What does that mean? Well, I think I can get this part. When lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. I desire a thing that is outside of the limits that God has set, and my desire is so strong that I go ahead and I commit that sin. I think I got that. But what about this business of when it is finished? Well, are you talking about when I get through overeating? No. Well, what are we talking about? You see, that I'm saying this is the factor that is missing. This is the strange factor that people do not have any knowledge of. And it's the reason why that gentleman called me about 1 John 3:9. This is what the whole Calvinistic world is in a debacle over. And individuals don't know that this word finished is so very important. It's the factor that the devil wants to make sure that you don't get. So what do we actually say? Let's look at it. I want you to be able to see it in your own Bible. I'm looking at it on a Bible program. Let's look at it very closely. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. How are we going to figure this out? Well, one of the ways that you figure a thing out is you tell yourself, convince yourself, you got to do this. This is not the only place that this information is found. We were in 1 John 3:9. Look at 1 John 3:9. When you look at 1 John 3:9, I guarantee you, if you look at it by itself, you're going to have trouble. 1 John 3:9. Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin, for his seed remaineth in him, and he cannot sin, because he is born of God. He cannot sin? You know that can't be the cannot that you would normally think, because 1 John 1:8 that we already looked at said, if you say that you don't sin, you have no sin, you are deceiving yourself. Let's look at that. 1 John 1 verse 8 again. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Well, 1 John 3, no, don't give me that. If you continue reading, we're going to come back to this. If you were to continue reading, you would end up seeing there is absolutely no way that verse means what you think it means, any more than this verse actually reads, when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin bringeth forth death. That is not what the verse says. The verse says that sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. What does it mean? Go somewhere else. What do you mean go somewhere else? Study the subject in another area. Can you drop the bottom third, or do I need to move this up? I can move it up probably easier than you can. Give me a second here. I can do it. Okay, here we go. Okay, I need my whole screen there. Okay, Look at this, Romans 6:13. Okay. Neither yield your members as instruments.
Today. I'm Johnny Robertson, and we're here live on What Does the Bible Say? We're in our school edition, Thursday, 1 p.m., our new time. We've finally been able to do it a couple of weeks in a row, and we appreciate you for being with us. One thing that we want to present to you, let's see, I don't think that I am actually on YouTube, internet, so let me just grab a hold right quick. Always want to give you a new book if I can. Each and every week we come across different books and want to share those things with you. Remember, we are in school, so it's not like we're on a different kind of broadcast where we're trying to keep a regular continuity as if we were on What Does the Bible Say live on Sunday night, What Does the Bible say live on Wednesday night, or What Does the Bible Say live on Thursday night, 9 p.m. on Sunday, 9 p.m. Wednesday, 8 p.m. Thursday. We are in school. You're with us. We hope that you have all of your tools ready. Strong's Concordance, very, very helpful. I use this. Matter of fact, here's a homework type of thing. You find Mount Gilboa for me. Now, as far as my search is concerned, I basically find Mount Gilboa for the first time in 1 Samuel 28, I do believe. Maybe it's 31. And so Caleb and I were discussing the other day, and I was saying, look, this is either a fluke or I'm just being, losing my mind, and I could be getting old. But I basically was looking in my concordance, and I was looking at the different ways that it could be spelled, and I was not able to position Mount Gilboa in a map. Now, you can find maps that have it, but finding where it really is, let's say, for instance, if you were to go to Joshua 15, where the land was given out to the people, you know what? You would just not be able to find Mount Gilboa that way. Well, what's so important about Mount Gilboa? Well, it was 31:1, 1 Samuel 31:1. All of a sudden, the Philistines fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And this is where Saul was killed. So I get out my concordance, and I look in, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to immediately find Mount Gilboa that way. And I didn't do it. And so it is a quandary to me. Now, I have a book in front of you right now. It's called A Survey of Israel's History. And it is a very, very good book. It is by Leon Wood. Might have mentioned it to you last week. It was published in 1971, I believe, and it was republished 4 times within 2 or 3 years. And it's because it is a really, really great it's a great book. One of the things I love about this particular survey is that the footnotes are all on the page. I have another book called Hours with the Bible, as opposed to Evenings with the Bible. Hours with the Bible by Cunningham Geikie. And the footnotes, you have to go all the way back to the back. And I mean, he does have some footnotes. So you have to go all the way back to the back in order to find the footnotes. But in this particular book, if I were looking at Saul dying at Mount Gilboa, which I may not have done that, but I actually looked on the maps in this book, which it has a lot of maps as you go through. I could not find, I can find on the map where persons say where Mount Gilboa is, but we like to do things biblically, and if there is a way to search out Mount Gilboa, then I want to do that. I recommend this book to you. It is in print. I ordered myself, Caleb, and James Kazi a volume of this. in the past week, and so I know they're out there. You can find them. I think they're in paperback and in hardback. There's a hardback edition, and I really am enjoying it. So, tools. We want you to have your tools out this afternoon because we're going to try to cover some information that we're trying to help you really to get a working knowledge of the Old Testament. Number one, you have to know the text. Once you start knowing the text, once you start building your memory banks and fill them up with the text, you're going to be really surprised how many different instances you will find yourself involved in that you could extricate yourself, or you could get some encouragement from some other individual that happened to be in the same kind of situation in the text. And so we are studying Kings and Chronicles, and one of the things we want to make sure that you realize is you can tell someone else, why don't you watch the school? These guys, if you think so, these guys are doing a great job. We're covering a lot of material. You know, one of the great things about YouTube, I'm saying I absolutely love this. A friend of mine, I believe that a friend of ours named Ben Hudson told me, I'm fairly 100% sure, 90%, 99% sure, let's say that, told me about the gear on YouTube where I could actually listen to broadcast in 1.75 or even 2.0, which 2.00, which means double time. And you can go through one of these classes. I'm not talking really, really fast. And so you can go through one of these classes by clicking on that ×2, and you can watch one of our shows in 1 hour. You do 175, then you're going to be doing it in about an hour and 40 minutes. No, an hour and 20 minutes. And 1.5, you'll be doing an hour and 30 minutes. And so, you know, that's saving a lot of time. I'm saying I am watching everything that I watch on YouTube these days. I am watching it in a faster speed and saving myself just lots and lots of time. So tell someone about YouTube. I ended up telling individuals this past week about YouTube. I was talking to 5 Hebrew Israelites, and I wanted them to be able to learn what's going on. And they said, well, what's your YouTube site? And I said, well, the YouTube site, I'm not even going to tell you the name of the YouTube site that actually is listed because it just confuses you. What does the Bible say is the broadcast that we're on today? But the way Google does, I don't know how they do things, but I do know this. All you have to do is type in Johnny Robertson. All you have to do is tell someone Johnny Robertson on YouTube or Google, and you'll get on our site. Second best, if you want help in us getting these different books like this, what you do is you email me at joeblue81@gmail.com. One of the quick things you can do is, if you're asking why Joe Blue 81, why Joe Blue at all? If you want to know why Joe Blue is my email, then just simply email me, why do you have Joe Blue as your email, and make sure you include your name and your town, and I'll send you Arkansas Angels. You'll definitely know why I have a YouTube called Joe Blue. He is my favorite old-time gospel preacher. So you can also text us, and that's a good way to get in touch with us, and I really do like it when people text me as opposed to calling me for different information. And I do apologize to Vince over in Arkansas that I haven't gotten back with you, man. We just have been busy. We've had funerals that we've had to attend and just really trying to keep things together. So I haven't forgotten you, and I haven't forgotten some of the other individuals. Appreciate fella over in Ben Blair. Just go ahead and call his name. Appreciate you. And sometimes I don't send out thank you notes like I should. I just really get behind. Appreciate you. Also appreciate a veterinarian friend of mine. You know, I believe he spells his name Jobe. And so I don't know if that is exactly how to pronounce that, but I'm doing some shout outs today of people that we do appreciate. And so here's a reminder. You know, when we are looking at the different books that you can have, A Harmony of Samuel Kings Chronicles by Crockett. It is, I don't have it with me today. It's a very valuable book. It allows you to be able to read. Now, what I end up doing is I have 3 Bibles that are just alike. And so when I'm not using the Harmony of Samuel Kings and Chronicles by Crockett, I happen to have 3 Bibles that are just exactly alike. And one is my old wide margin Bible. Then I have this one, and another friend of mine, one of the same friends, James Causey, got me another one the other day. I can spread 3 of them out on the table. Why would you want to spread 3 of them out on the table? Well, I can open one at Samuel, 2 Samuel. I can open one at Chronicles, and I can open another one at Kings. And what I have is I have all of the story running concurrent, because some of these things are actually recorded 3 different times. You think God wants you to get this? Absolutely. If it's recorded 3 different times, one of the easy keys to, or one of the helpful keys to studying Kings and Chronicles is Kings generally keys in on the kings of Israel. You'll find more on the kings of Israel, 10 tribes of Israel, which we're going to actually discuss the division today. And then Chronicles keys in more on kings of Judah. And so you'll get a fuller sense of what is taking place. For instance, the king Rehoboam, who we talked about a little bit last week. There's much more about Rehoboam in Second Chronicles 11 and 12 than there is in Kings. Now, one of the things that we were looking at last week also is we were telling you how few individuals that you end up discussing in some of these readings. You know, a lot of times you think that you're going to have to just do a major amount of memory, and you're really not. You're going to be discussing, if you're in 1 Kings chapter 10 and 11, 12, you're going to be discussing Solomon, and you're going to be moving over to 2 Chronicles 11 and 12, and you're going to be discussing Solomon again and his son Rehoboam. It's really simple. I mean, it's the same exact, especially when it's that way. When for a little while your Kings and Chronicles are actually the same number, the chapters are the same number, it makes it really, really helpful for you to remember things. Now, so that's what we're saying, navigating. 1 Kings chapter 12 equals 2 Chronicles chapter 12. That is fabulous. It is just so good if you can actually learn the sister or the harmonious passages, the harmony between Kings and Chronicles. And so those are some of the tools that you need to know. What's in 1 Kings 1 through 11 and 2 Chronicles 1 through 11? The reign of Solomon. How about that? It's just that simple. They're chronological in the sense, even the numbers are chronological. So when you start, there's no real need to be confused. Now, I would really encourage you, if you have the capability, this is not just necessarily a must, but if you have the capability of having 2 Bibles, and if you had the blessing of having the same kind of Bibles, 2 of the same kind of Bibles, then when you're doing your study, you actually are seeing page placement, and that's going to help you a lot as well. But for me, this is great. 1 Kings 1 through 11, the life of Solomon. 2 Chronicles 1 through 11, the reign of Solomon, or the life of Solomon. Now, 1 Kings chapter 12 through 22, you're going to be discussing Israel. 1 Kings chapter 12 through the last chapter, you're going to be discussing Israel, Jeroboam, Ahab, and it really is helpful when you know some of these things. Chapter lineup or character lineup. Prophets, Ahijah, Jehu is not a king, Elijah, and Micaiah. So it's just a very, I say, an extremely useful and helpful piece of information to get some of this chronology together and start learning your placement. Now, this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at our moving. Let's say we're going to do this. We're going to move ahead now. And I would like for you to, at this juncture, as we move into our actual text, what I'd like for you to do is I would like for you to meditate just a minute on what do you do when you actually get a reproof. Now, you might say, well, why didn't you say rebuke? Because there's a difference between reproof and rebuke. In Ephesians 5:11, we're told not to have fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Well, you might say, I usually rebuke people. Well, that passage says reprove. And one of the things about it is that passage is correct in what it is saying to you. It is not a rebuking passage. It is actually a reproving passage and command. And I'm going to try my best this morning, or this afternoon. I usually have a hard time with this morning and afternoon. I'm going to try my best this afternoon to help you to realize that when we say that a passage is, or a word is what it is, we're basically saying that the Greek is being meticulous for a reason, and I'm not giving you in any way a Greek lesson, but I want you to notice this. In Matthew 18:15, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. Now, do you realize that the phrase, tell him his fault, is actually the same exact word as Ephesians chapter 5, Ephesians 5, verse 11? Now, ask you this. I have a lot of people that try to tell me things about people, and it really aggravates me that they tell me things about people, and I ask them if they've talked to those people. And I'm not saying that you do have to talk to every person that you know is doing something, but I am saying this. If you're going to talk to a person, let's say for instance, about persons with whom they're having fellowship, you know what you need to be able to do? You need to be able to tell them their fault. Now, if you're talking to them about fellowshipping someone, and the actual word is tell them their fault, can you actually do this without giving them some proof? If I just tell you, well, I know, let's just say, I know Dan Jenkins, Dan Winkler. I know that Dan Winkler is involved with several false teachers. Now, I'm basically telling you about Dan Winkler, and it is the case that Dan Winkler is involved with several false teachers. But what if I can show you his fault? And when I talk to Dan Winkler, I am showing him his fault as well. Tell him his fault. You might be saying, well, Johnny, you're just telling me this today. Can I tell you something? You get on a website right now entitled ptpera.com, and guess what? I will have shown you the fault of Dan Winkler. ptpera.com. Exposing fellowship, era at polishing the pulpit. If you get on this website, you know what you're going to actually find? You're going to find individuals that are speakers on the Polishing the Pulpit website, Polishing the Pulpit program, at least the last time they were. There's Dan Winkler. All you have to do is click on Dan Winkler's face, or his, whatever the hot link is here, and it's his face. And guess what? It will take you to his faults. It will take you to the lectureship programs, and you'll be able to see the people with whom he is involved. And let me tell you, there are a bunch of folk on there who are involved with all kinds of false teachers. What you'll see Dan on lectureships. Then we will show you the people that he is on the lectureship with. We will show you them on noted false lectureships like Pepperdine, Oklahoma University. We'll just show you a whole lineup of places of people that you will say, what in the world? Dan Winkler is running with all kinds of false teachers. Dan Winkler is a false teacher. What on? Fellowship. He may be teaching false doctrine on some other things, but I tell you this, he is not following Ephesians 5:11. And so this is extremely important. A lot of people are put off by individuals telling them that people are involved in certain things, and then you can't prove that to them. You can't tell them their fault. You can't demonstrate. There are some things that you have to demonstrate. And so this afternoon, we're basically saying we are trying our best to make sure that you recognize that the things that we are putting out here are in fact factual. Now we're back to our thought. What is our thought? What do you do when you get a message? You get a message from God. How you get a message from God? You can get a message from God on what does the Bible say. I just showed you a message from God, Ephesians 5:11. Don't be fellowshipping the unfruitful works of darkness. That's a message from God. What do you do when you get a message from God? 1Kings chapter 11:11. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee and give it to thy servant. The reason we're showing you this afternoon is we're showing you what happens when a person ends up going full off into error. That's what Solomon did. Now, last week we covered the fact that Solomon was marrying all these different women, and I was advocating in part that Solomon is marrying individuals to fix his fears. He is making affinity with people around him to shore up his borders. These folk are living in a dangerous set of affairs. So are we. We demonstrated last week. If you didn't see last week's broadcast, go over there and get on the YouTube and watch it. Put it on 1.5, watch it real quick, and you'll get a lot of information that will help you to be careful with the friends that you make, with the affinity, who you make peace with, and who you surround yourself with. Now, when we are telling you this, we're basically leading you to this point. We're leading you to the end result. And the end result is that because Solomon continued in his activity, and not only was he involved in marrying these women, he ended up bringing in what they worship. Isn't that a very, very similar thing to what we all go through? We like the things our friends like. That's why they're our friends. We like the things our mates like. That's why they are our mate. And generally what our mate likes, we're involved to a certain degree. Well, if my mate likes something that is ungodly, if it is unapproved, if it is sinful, then likely I'm going to be involved in that to a certain degree. And so those are just givens. And so I'm asking you, what do you do? What does a message do to you? Well, a message in our studies, what we're trying to show is the deviation that these individuals were involved in, and we're trying to ask you right now, how did you feel about the deviation? How did you feel about the end of the matter, the situation? And that really is what it comes down to. You're tenderizing your heart. By reading this, when you believe this to be the truth, you're tenderizing your heart. You're tenderizing yourself in regard to how you feel when you see the end of a result. You're causing yourself to beware. See, these are things that happen that you might not realize that they are happening. I would think maybe you should already know this is the Word of God. Well, you might say, well, I really studied just to see what these guys were doing and actually see when God was going to snuff them out and the punishment they were going to get. I didn't really realize that we were portraying the lives in such a way that it would soften our hearts. I am going to take the time just a minute to look at a piece of information, if I can find it in this book. It just struck me that it was there, and it's of such a nature that it would be useful if I could find it. And it is actually talking about David. It basically talks about David's life and his mistake with Bathsheba. And one of the observations that the writer makes is by not covering it up, what it actually does is it helps the moral makeup of individuals that are reading this. You know, when you gloss over a person's life, and I have told people that are involved with me, Caleb and I visited a gentleman in Dallas that knew Leroy Garrett. And the reason Caleb is studying Leroy Garrett is because he had been reading Ira Rice's Contending for the Faith, and he's actually reading, like I told you, information that is showing the fault. It is real life information from these individuals, Leroy Garrett being one of them. And so Caleb decided that he wanted to get more information about Leroy Garrett and find out, you know, how did he get to where he was? What were some of the changes? Caleb and I have talked about going and seeing Rubel Shelley and actually talking to him about the shape of the brotherhood at large and see what he says about that. After all of these years, I would like to hear, as would Caleb, we would like to actually hear what he has to say, what he would say about how everybody's turned out. Because for the most part, most people have turned out just as badly as they were saying he turned out back in the day. Let's just see here just a minute. I may have this in the footnotes. I'm going to give it up here quick. I don't actually find it. It was a very good point, and it is, let me say this, it's under the heading of David's fall. I may have not gotten to it. This is just a overall. But I will have it for you the next time. But as I say, the gist of it is the things that are happening in here, not glossing them over and seeing the end result. What happens when a person starts worshiping things that their wives are worshiping and letting their wives get them into something. So what does the message do to you? What does the message do to Solomon? Notice 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 6. Whereupon the prince of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, the Lord is righteous. Now this is his son. This is Solomon. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I'm going to take the kingdom from you, and I'm going to give it to a servant. Well, here's his son. 2 Chronicles 12, verse 6. Remember what I said, 1Kings 11, we're talking about Solomon. 2 Chronicles chapter 12, now you're talking about Solomon's son. Now, notice this. Whereupon the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, the Lord is righteous. And when the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shimei, saying, they have humbled themselves, therefore I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out upon Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. You know, I would like to actually say two different things here. You have the picture of, or the question put in front of you, what do you do when a message is given to you? Number one. Number two, how do you feel about the person who tells you? You know, in this particular instance, God was talking to Solomon. God spoke directly to Solomon on more than one occasion, but in this particular instance, he's talking to Rehoboam. This is a statement to Rehoboam, and this is Shimei, the prophet. And, you know, as you are seeing this, and you're seeing the end of Solomon, which you know the end of Solomon, his kingdom was rent from him by Jeroboam, and you have his son being told that he's going to actually end up meeting with a king that he really doesn't want to meet with on the terms he's going to meet with, an Egyptian pharaoh named Shishak. How do you feel about individuals that are talking to you? Again, that is what our school is about. We're telling you things in the brotherhood. We're telling you about things in the brotherhood. Can I just ask you a personal question? How did you feel about me talking about Dan Winkler? I have no ill will for Dan Winkler. As a matter of fact, in 1998, Dan Winkler was within 40 miles of here, Martinsville, Virginia, and I went to the meeting that he was preaching just so that I could ask him a couple of questions and talk to him about the direction that he was taking with people on the school, the college, Ohio Valley College, And the picture that it put forth by him being on that college lectureship was so many false teachers. You know what he said to me? He said, Johnny, if you keep drawing your circle as tight as you're drawing it, one of these days it's going to be so tight that you're the only one in it. Well, it's one of these days. That was 1998. This is 2022. We have so many individuals that are involved with us and support us, and he is involved with so many more false teachers now that he might as well just go on over and be on Pepperdine himself, because he's on programs with people that are on Pepperdine. He should just go ahead and make the switch, and because he's not doing anything by not being on Pepperdine if he is actually being on programs with people that are on Pepperdine. Though some of you are watching, and I know that there are some young people watching, and you may be saying, what is Pepperdine? Pepperdine used to be a college associated with the Churches of Christ. You get on their lectureship, they'll have 300 people on their lectureship, something like that. And you'll see a lot of Churches of Christ that you might recognize from old time. Do you know what? There are many of those congregations that are actually community churches over in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But in order to keep Pepperdine from looking so bad, they actually call themselves by the name that they used to wear, such and such Church of Christ, rather than community church. That's the kind of things that they do. Yet my question is, honestly, my question is, how do you feel? What does a message do to you? And number two, how do you feel about the person that is telling you? There is a lot, I'd say there's a lot of public relations that need to be done in our brotherhood. And I'm saying to you, you could help us. And I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you something that is just simply free, and that is word of mouth. I know some individuals, as some of these appeals have gone out, you have posted back on our YouTube saying, I told somebody that I knew you and I watched you, and they asked me to leave. Well, that's not going to happen every time. We met a lot of people this past week at a funeral that Caleb and I went to in Orlando, and a lot of people were telling us, individuals that they know that are watching our broadcast, and the good that it is actually doing for them. And so you could do that. How do you feel about us? Are we doing you a favor by giving you these lessons and giving you this information? Is it a favor to you that you can find out that certain behavior end up putting you in a position to have Shishak in your front yard? Who is Shishak? Shishak is an individual that God is using. He is using him to bring you around. Your answer might be, do you realize that your life is exactly like these people's lives? There are, in Judges 1 and 2, the Bible says that God sent hornets. Now, can you affirm or deny that there are hornets around? Do you know that hornets can actually infest your house? And it is very possible. I'm not saying God infest your house with hornets. But let's just say this. If you're not being studious, a good steward, it could be the case that you're not taking care of things, and the next thing you know, then there are hornets coming into your house, and all you would have had to do is a little bit of pest control. What does that mean? We're just talking about doing things that in a spiritual realm, pest control. There are a lot of spiritual pests that you could make a little bit of effort, and you could keep those things from coming into your life. That's what we're saying. A Shishak. Shishak is sent in to punish. A Shishak is sent in to make them people wake up. Let me just see if I can build this principle in your mind. I want you to think about, if you will, how much you know about the way God works. Now, we are taking time now. You can watch this in fast speed, so you can say, Johnny did a lot of pausing on his Thursday class. But I really want you to think about, we talk about knowing the tools of the devil from 2 Corinthians chapter 2, his devices. But I wonder if you know how God works. You know, as you look out over our world and you see things happening and you try to question if God is involved in our world. Folks, God is involved in our world. 1 Peter 5:8 says that the devil as a roaring lion, be vigilant, be sober, because the devil as a roaring lion is seeking whom he may devour. If he is in our realm and he uses his agents, 2 Corinthians chapter 10 calls them his ministers, if he's using his ministers to get you down, is it the case that God is basically the adversary of the devil and trying to help you? But the thing is, God isn't going to reach in and do something supernatural for you. He's not going to alter the universe in order to bring you around. But how does God work? Notice this. God has in reserve things that are happening that change events or make events happen the way that he wants to. What does that mean? Romans chapter 8, verse 28. All things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. God can manage the affairs of the world in such a way that it changes the way you behave. Is it the case that when you're reading the book of Daniel that you find out that God actually rules in the kingdoms of men? That was the message for Belshazzar and for the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, that God rules in the kingdoms of men. Is it the case that things that are going on right now are basically creating an atmosphere where you don't feel as much as like in control? Maybe our world is fragile. Maybe you're thinking about making some changes. Maybe you're thinking about tightening your belt, as they say, austerity, getting closer to the vest, to use some idioms that are metaphorical pieces of speech. Are you doing things so that if a catastrophe, like, some people are saying the Great Depression is on us? I was told by my 93-year-old friend that just died, his estimation was this is going to be worse before it's all said and done than the Great Depression. So my question is it the case that certain things happen? Well, look at this. Judges 13:5. This is a piece of information from the life of Samson. Judges 13:5, speaking to his mother, for lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Here's the children of Israel. They're being plagued by the Philistines. Now, if you're studying with us, I just can't believe that you are not aware of the territory that actually was held by the Philistines when the children of Israel came in to the land of Canaan. All the coastal land up and down the coast on the western side, Mediterranean Sea. There's a lot of people say, I don't know history, maps and whatnot of the Old Testament of Israel. Listen, you don't know about the Mediterranean. You've never heard of cruises. You've never seen anybody in the news or some commercial or whatever for cruises. I mean, we're talking about cruises going down up and down rivers in Holland. You've not seen the Mediterranean Sea? Off the Mediterranean Sea, you have all of this land coming up from Egypt towards Israel, and the Philistines were the individuals that were primary inhabitants of that land. You might say, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I ask you, did it make sense to you when the Pilgrims first landed in America? Do you not know that there were all kinds of Indians up and down the eastern seaboard? What is the difference? What's the difference in knowing that? The difference is you care about one and you don't care about the other. And the reason when you don't care about the other is because you don't think it has anything to do with you. But we're asking the question this afternoon, do you know how God works? A child was about to be born to a barren woman, and the message to the woman is that God was actually bringing in a deliverer to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't think you really realize how God works. And if you don't understand how God works, you see things one way when in reality, you could be looking at it in another, and you could come away loving God and appreciating Him because you're now able to see how He works. Judges 14:2. That was Judges 13. That's his birth. Judges 14:2. You know, I will say some of the things that I read about Samson, they just don't give Samson a break at all. Awful talk about Samson, and when in fact it says, and he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Now in this particular instance, I'm not saying in all instances, I would encourage you to marry a Christian. But in this particular instance, they did not realize how it was that God was going to use Samson as a deliverer. Verse 4, but his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. The things that were going to happen to Samson in association with these women was giving him an occasion to fight with the Philistines. And it is clearly said it was of God. You know, Samson was involved with Delilah. Everybody knows that. And you basically know that as a result of being involved with Delilah, he ends up being arrested because he tells his secret, and he ends up killing more Philistines in his death after they had captured him than in his life. Well, on more than one occasion, he was involved with Philistine women, and as a result of the Philistines trying to get to him through these women, it caused occasions for him to kill multitudes of the Philistines. What did that do? It created an awareness. Do you know some Philistines actually abdicated? They moved over. You know, if you're reading about a Gittite, G-I-T, that kind of type, Gittite. If you're reading about a Gittite, you're reading about particular families in the Philistines. The next time you read about a Gittite, just think, David had several individuals, maybe not several individuals, but he had some very close individuals in his group of secret service, if you will, that were Gittites. They were very good at war. They were very good at battle. Now, this is just a side note. It's not really a side note. It's you getting to know how God is. You know, you probably were hating on Samson, thinking that there just really wasn't anything moral about Samson. And his parents were basically saying the same thing. And if you went out and married a harlot, I would probably say the same thing to you. You're not really thinking very morally, and you're not planning ahead. But in this particular instance, you have to realize this is one of those accounts. This is one of those places where God has something in reserve, and it's not the way that you would do it in order to straighten things out and change the outcome. But the point is, you're going to have to get used to God, and you're going to have to get used to the way God does things, and what that way to do is not pain. Because some of the things that God is doing, they're difficult. What does that mean? Do you know that the children of Israel didn't like Samson for the most part? Because Samson was constantly causing issues between them and the Philistines, but he was also at the same time getting rid of a lot of the Philistines. He was actually creating an awareness amongst the Philistines that God has a powerful advocate, and the only way this guy could be what he is, the strength that he had, the ability to kill 300 or 400 people at one time, to be able to push pillars down and actually destroy a whole gathering there that were mocking him and there to worship their God. They were aware that he had that power from God. Now, 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 19, and the Lord was very angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice. And he commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, For as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom. I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and I will give it to thy servant. Now, this is basically how God is going to fix the situation. What do you mean, the situation? Do you realize just how bad things were by the time that Solomon's reign was over. Solomon, over to the eastern side of Jerusalem, Solomon had other worship going on. And, if you have studied your Old Testament, you know that there are smells associated with these worships. Like if you're a Jew and you're worshiping on a particular time frame, if you're in that morning or the evening, you're going to smell the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice. And if you've ever been to a barbecue, that's going to be a very, very nice smell as the sacrificial smell goes up. But if you happen to be worshiping, let's say, the god of the Moabites, and these individuals are offering offerings that would be human flesh, smell. And that's the kind of thing that is going on over there. Not to mention, if God continues to let this go on, there are all kinds of rituals associated with these false gods, with these worships, where people are involved in immoral activity. Now, I can imagine that people are thinking right now, this is like mythological Greek, Greek mythology, Thor and the little Valentine, Cupid, and things of that nature. And, you're going through this kind of stuff. Listen, y'all, do you not think that there are immoral things going on in religion today? Do you know that the incidences of sexual activity associated with pastors and members of their church are just rampant? It is very likely that you don't know that, because many members of the Church of Christ are so involved in making their material life that they don't even bother to keep up with the woes, the terrible woes that their neighbors are dealing with as a result of the religious situation or the religious group they're in. What do you mean? Have you not heard of pedophilia that goes on in the Roman Catholic Church? Can you imagine? Do you not know someone, especially down in southern Texas where you have a lot of Hispanic people? You not known someone that was involved in a priest messing around with children, Boy Scouts setups where individuals are messing around with the kids? I know Baptists, Southern Baptists, Independent Fundamental Baptists. I actually know a person that was being used in Texas as a youth minister, which is basically a cheerleader for the kids, had no value whatsoever spiritually, and this guy was molesting the boys in the group. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That's immoral sexual behavior that comes out of religions today. So don't tell me that this is Greek mythology when we start talking about, over there on the eastern side of Jerusalem, out of the sight somewhat of the regular temple, they were practicing all kinds of immoral activity. It is the case that that's what was going on. And God is basically arresting that. And why is he arraying that for us? Because one of the things he's arraying in front of us is God has a purpose, he has a plan, and it is going to stand. And what you're doing is you're reading how individuals got off, you're tenderizing your heart, you're making yourself prudent, you're making yourself wiser to the situations as a result of the fact that you are. I can actually be studying, and it's not always that I get this opportunity to study when my phone's not ringing. Usually I have to be up several hours before daylight to, now you might say, well, you could turn your phone off. I could do a lot of things that I don't do, trying to help people, so I do let my phone be on, but early in the morning, and there are different times when some time frame my phone doesn't go on, and I'm reading and I'm studying the lives of these individuals, and I enter it. What does that mean? Have you never just totally got lost in a story and you end up trying to find the details and figure out just exactly what happened and why it is certain things happen? Like, for instance, I'm in 1 Chronicles chapter 13 right now, and I'm actually looking at 13:13. And so David brought not the ark home to himself, to the city of David, but carried it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. How that's going? See what I mean? I get into these accounts and I begin to realize that, Obed-Edom, is he a Philistine that converted? He determined that the God of heaven is the God of the heavens and the earth and all that there is in them is. Well, it is possible, because when the children of Israel lost the Ark of the Covenant in one of the battles associated with Eli and Saul, they lost the Ark of the Covenant. Do you basically remember what happened? They moved it around to their different cities where they had their temples, and their gods all suffered with the Ark of the Covenant being in there. And then plagues, the entire area was plagued as a result of them having the Ark of the Covenant and touching things that they shouldn't touch, to the point that they sent it home. They sent it somewhere. Get that thing back to Israel. Would that be enough for you to convert? Let me tell you. Do you realize that by America being in World War II, the area where I worked in the Pacific was a place where people's hearts were tenderized and ready to hear the gospel? Why? Because Japan had conquered them, and the Japanese were a horrendous people. They had no feelings whatsoever for the native islanders, and America came in, and if the God of the Americans can be strong enough to get rid of the Japanese, let me tell you what, these islanders were converting. Well, you might say they converted to a lot of false religions, and that's right. But one of the things that happened when I was going over there, one of the easy things that I basically had this saying, and it really got to a lot of them. They would ask me, well, what is it that you're teaching? And I would say, I'm going to be the only group, I'm going to be associated with the only church, the only religious group that is actually going to show you the church that I'm telling you about in the Bible. The rest of these individuals are going to just be telling you about man-made churches, and they're going to read Bible scriptures to you. And I would be able to say to them, the church that I'm going to tell you about, it will actually be in the Bible. You would not believe the response that they had. They had been tenderized as a result of the things that had happened by the Americans who were noted as a Christian nation. I don't think that's the case anymore. But see, what we're talking about is, how is it the case that Obed-Edom could have been a Gittite? He is a Gittite, there is no doubt. You just have to determine if he's a Philistine, a converted Philistine. See what we're saying? God has people in reserve, and he's doing things in the book of Judges. He was doing things with Samson that a lot of people just can't grasp. And as a result of that, you have a very poor view of Samson, and you have a poor view of God once you find out that God has Samson in the role of faithful in Hebrews chapter 11. If you don't get that fixed, there's going to be problems with you and God. There's going to be problems with you and performance associated with God, because you've got a view of God that's incorrect, and you have a view of the way God does things that's incorrect, and you need to get tuned in. Now, 1Kings 11:29. And it came to pass at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment, and they too were alone in the field. Here, basically, is your reserve. God told Solomon, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. This business about you having all these false gods over here to the side of Jerusalem and all the stuff that's going on over there, that's just not going to go. I am going to keep the kingdom going as far as the tribe of Judah, because I promised that I would to David. But as far as you, I'm going to rend it. I'm not going to rend it actually in your lifetime. I'm going to wait until you're dead, and I'm going to take it from your son, and I'm going to give it to, and he basically brings this into our view in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 29. It came to pass at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. So basically, you have a prophet. What what I call, or I've heard called, a non-writing prophet. He is a prophet that doesn't have anything written that we actually have. He was a person that God had in reserve. In other words, he was a teller. He was a person that would come along, you would come into contact with him, and he would tell you something from God. And in this particular instance, he tells Jeroboam, who happens to be a person who is of the tribe of Ephraim. He is of the family of Joseph, it says later. Right here, it doesn't say he's an Ephraimite. It actually talks about where he lives. A lot of people get confused, but later on it says he's of the household of Joseph. And he tells him, you know, he's an industrious guy. He doesn't tell him he's an industrious guy. The text tells you that he's a very industrious guy, that Solomon has recognized him to be industrious and put him over the building of the defenses around Milo. Can't find Milo either, so as a piece of homework, if you can put me on a fast track to more information about Milo. It's just one of my curiosities. I like to know my places, and I like to know what's going on and what is actually happening. It seems that there's not seem about it. Jeroboam has a new garment, and so he comes into contact with Ahijah, and Ahijah basically takes the garment off of him, and he rips it into 10 pieces, and he basically says, this is representing the 10 tribes of Israel, and God's going to give them to you. Now, you might say, well, that actually goes against something that we've already read, that somebody told me was the case, and that was Genesis 49:10. This can't be right. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Well, it can actually be true. It can be true that a person from the household of Joseph, even though Psalm 78:67 says, moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph and chose not the tribe of Ephraim, both of which Jeroboam happens to come from. He is of the family of Ephraim, who is one of the sons of Joseph. Well, it says he refused that tabernacle. He refused that household to be the one through whom Jesus comes. There's the key. He refused him from the standpoint of he's not bringing the Messiah through him. He's going to bring the Messiah through Judah. And that's one of the reasons, that is the reason that God said what he said to Solomon, that he was going to allow his son to reign and that seed to continue on, and that he was going to take the kingdom from his son. Now, you ever think about what you're doing? Is it the case that activity, a life choice that you make, is going to create a hardship for your children down there? Like, you know, I read this the other day, and I can't remember where it was. I kind of think it was in a book by Samuel H. Hill, where it talked about the fact that often the children, they take off the religion of their parents, and then the grandchildren end up trying to find it and put it back on. Because oftentimes children see the behaviors of their parents and they say, they're a bunch of hypocrites and I'm not going to live this. But the grandchildren actually see a different vantage. They see differently when they're talking about their grandparents. And oftentimes the grandchildren aren't judging the grandparents because the grandparents are not controlling the grandchildren like you're controlling your own children. What does that mean? We all have wills. When we have to go against our children's will, oftentimes our children will turn around and say, no, you're not being as strict on yourself as you're being on me, and I'm done with this. Well, I'm asking you, you ever make any life choices that are going to end up causing problems for your children later on in life as they grow up? Looking at here, we're basically looking at life choices that Solomon was making that was going to make it harder. The payment was going to come down on his son, Rehoboam. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 31, and he said to Jeroboam, take the 10 pieces, for thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 tribes to thee. You know, if you're studying the Old Testament and you do not realize that the Old Testament from this point on, from 1 Kings on, if you do not realize that it is about two different kingdoms that are running concurrent, side by side, then you're not going to have a clue what's going on. You're actually watching two groups, two families. One family, and this happens in our lifetime. One part of the family is less inclined to spiritual things, and you're going to watch the trajectory, and you get to see all the different things that happen to the children who are family members of the less spiritually inclined. And then on the other, you're going to have you're going to have a view of another set of family members. Oftentimes, you're going to say about them, they're not having any fun. They're just fuddy-duddies. They, mama's babies, daddy's babies, whatever. And they just don't want to make mom and dad happy. And, you know, the preachers are sometimes hypocrites, and the people that associate with the church are often hypocrites. That's the case, but that doesn't have anything to do with truth, does it? Because people are living in hypocrisy doesn't necessarily mean that the truth, it doesn't mean at all that the truth for which they're supposed to be striving is actually true, not true, but false. It just means some individuals are not doing. Seeing in this, you're getting to see families that are less spiritually inclined, and the trajectory and the woes and the difficulties associated with their life choices. Then you're getting to see the other group of individuals that are supposed to be more spiritually inclined. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they are not. And so you're watching the kingdom rend. You're watching 10 tribes of Israel come into existence. You're watching the tribe of Judah come into existence all by itself, with other individuals that are associated with it because of their connection to spiritual things, which would be Benjamin and Simeon, their proximity to the tribe of Judah. Notice 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 37. And I will take thee, and thou shalt reign according to all thy soul desireth, and shalt be the king over Israel. Talking again, we're still talking about Jeroboam. And it shall be, if thou wilt hearken unto all that I command thee, and will walk in my ways, and do that is right in my sight, keep my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, that I will be with thee, and I'll build thee a sure house, as I built David. And I will give Israel unto thee, and I will for this afflict the seed of David, but not forever. Well, you might be saying, wait a minute, the seed line is supposed to come, the Messiah is supposed to come through Judah. And if God makes Jeroboam a house, would that not conflict with his message? Can I ask you something? When Jesus comes on the scene, are all the 12 tribes still there? Are they all intact? Yes, they are. It doesn't mean that if Jeroboam would have stayed faithful, that somehow or other he would have interrupted the plan, and all of a sudden the house of which we just read in Psalm 78, God refused the tabernacle of Joseph and chose not the tribe of Ephraim. It wouldn't change any truth there. All of these individuals are still intact, and so is the house of Judah. And who was he born to? He was born to Joseph and Mary, both of whom are from the tribe of, but the other tribes are there as well. Right now they don't have a king, if you're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Nevertheless, this could have been totally different if Jeroboam had have been faithful. 1 Kings 12:22. But the word of God came unto Shimei, the man of God, saying, Speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and to all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people, saying, remember what I said. How do you feel about being told something? When you're watching these individuals and you're reading, how do you feel about the person who is talking? Can you imagine how hard it would be to be a guy or an Ahijah? Now, right now, it's pretty nice to be Ahijah. Ahijah is actually telling someone, you're going to get to have 10 tribes. You're going to be king, and you'll have a house forever if you will be faithful. But Shimei, totally different thing. Can I stop and make another plug? Or what does the Bible say? You know, folks, it is difficult to say the things that we say and to be the people that we are. Do you know how much pressure we were under as a result of friends creating this website and us helping supply the information? Do you know what it was like? I don't know what it was like. I was not involved. But I do know the individuals who were involved. This PTPera.com was a banner, the one that was put up in front of Polishing the Pulpit Hotel over in Pigeon Forge, August in 2019, was put on a U-Haul, big 10 by 8 banner. It had these faces on it. PTPera.com had Dan Winkler, Melvin Odie, Steve Higginbotham, and Phil Sanders. All of their faces, big life-size faces, all down that banner on the side of a U-Haul and also placed in another very conspicuous place. You know what it was like to be associated with that? 5,000 individuals associated with the Church of Christ over in Pigeon Forge, and they're milling around in all these different places. They're seeing that banner on a U-Haul. What do you think they would have done if they could have gotten their hands on the individuals responsible for it? You might say, well, it didn't accomplish anything. They had 5,000 individuals that came to it. 1,400 of them got on the website within 48 hours. 1,400 individuals, that's about a quarter of the individuals that went to the event. They got on the website and they went through the information. The website fed up locations. You had people from Hawaii to other parts of the world that had come to Polishing the Pulpit, and they were all seeing this information. Why did we do it? We do it because we're concerned. Why did Shimei talk to Rehoboam? Why did Ahijah talk to Jeroboam? Concern. Trying to get individuals' life choices. It was a life choice to go to Polishing the Pulpit. If you became friendly with those individuals that are speaking at Polishing the Pulpit, it's likely that you brought some or several of them in to do meetings for you, teach you what they teach. And all of a sudden, you became involved with schools like Bear Valley, who is giving out diplomas to individuals who are in denominational churches. Why would a school of preaching associated with the Church of Christ give out a master's diploma to someone that is in a denomination? Can you answer that question? I can't. I cannot understand why you would want to further a false doctrine by giving a person a piece of paper that actually put forth the idea that he is a scholar. He has mastered some particular portion of something. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And other schools that associate with them. Well, what schools associate with Bear Valley? What schools don't? What schools associate with the different colleges that are associated with the Church of Christ? That's what we were doing. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about knowing that we had some association with that, with putting together the material that went on that, even though we don't have the brains to make such a website? And I ask you, well, what do you think people would do to the people that were doing that, and if they could get their hands on them? What the video footage showed of what they did to the actual banner. Individuals, members of the Church of Christ, as they were sitting in a eating establishment watching or looking at that particular banner, someone went out and actually committed a felony, tore the banner off of its place where it was affixed, and destroyed it. While the video camera that was associated with the eating establishment, who happened to be a Catholic individual, by the way, the person who was in charge of security, he gave over the footage because it was so distasteful to him to watch them act in the manner in which they did, defacing someone else's equipment or property and even stealing it and getting rid of it. How do you feel when someone is trying to help you with your life decisions? How do you feel when you're reading about life decisions that other people are actually making? Well, what you're supposed to be feeling is your heart's supposed to. Your mind is supposed to be affected in such a way you're becoming more prudent, you're becoming more sober, you're vigilant, you're actually having someone warn you about life decisions, and you're also learning how God works in the sense of He has these things in reserve. Is there a entity
in the world like Samson? Well, you don't have miracles. Well, can I ask you, do you believe that we are to pray for the persons who are in power? Do you have a governor that is in a position to change the area, the particular region where you live? Those individuals are actually ministers. That's what the Bible says. I mean, we generally don't even pay attention to what the real context is of Romans chapter 13. But individuals that are in power, they are ministers, and they are actually in reserve. That's what we're talking about when we were talking about Samson. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinances of God, and they that resist shall receive of themselves damnation. For the rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou not be then afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same, for he is a minister of God to thee for good. Even Rehoboam, even Jeroboam, he started out being a reserve agent for good, for change. He ended up not doing what he needed to do or what God wanted him to do, but he did do what God had designed. He took the kingdom away from Rehoboam. He rent the kingdom as a result of punishment for the behavior of Rehoboam's father, which was a warning to Rehoboam. Notice, look at this. But the word of God came unto Shimei, the man of God, saying, Speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and unto all the house of Judah and to Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people, saying, What is the speaker? What is the non-writing prophet going to say? Thus saith the Lord, You shall not go up nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. Return every man to his house, for this thing is from me. They hearken therefore to the word of God, of the Lord, and return to depart according to the word of the Lord. Can you get what's going on here? Here is information that you're getting firsthand, that in fact God has chosen a person from the household of Joseph. He is going to be involved in taking the kingdom portion of it, the larger portion, away from Rehoboam. Well, naturally, Rehoboam is going to think that he should do something about this. But in fact, he ends up getting the message that this is from God. You know, I can tell you this, a very good practice that you can be involved in. Very good practice that you can be involved in is you trying to figure out what is of God. Well, I can tell you this, just like, I just basically know, I know how people think when we start talking about things like this, because individuals are going to start talking about, well, here we go with the miraculous again, and we're not talking about that. No, not talking about miraculous. How can you know that something is not of God? If it be possible, as much as lieth with you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thy enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him a drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. If you're involved in avenging yourself, that's not. See what we're saying? How can you tell that God is in something or not in this? Rehoboam is being told by Shimei, just hold up. I see what's happening. I see what Jeroboam is doing. I can see that the 10 tribes are going after Jeroboam. And I know you feel like getting your 130,000 individuals together. You've already got them all hyped up. But this is of God. Wouldn't you like to know if things are of God or not? I mean, would you like for someone to tell you that this is not of God? This is of God. You can do that. Question is, as we started our broadcast, our show, our class, we were asking you, do you like to be the listener What do you think about the person who's telling you? Is he a person that you like the way he looks, he's appealing and all that? You know, this isn't my message. You can know whether or not God is in a thing or not. Not just Romans chapter 12. Binge, not yourself. Live peaceably. That's basically of God. Trying to be peaceable with people, trying to restrain yourself. Last week we talked about Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is desperately wicked. And then we moved on to the next verse, and it tells us that God is trying our reins. He's trying to help us to understand or to learn whether or not we've got a rein on things. And we mentioned a moment ago the way things are going right now. If it is in fact the case that we're heading into times that are worse than the Great Depression, have you reined in your spending? Have you started paying attention to the fact that you might need to do some preparation? See, he wants you to know your own reins. He's trying your reins. And in this particular instance, we're hearing, as a king, I cannot imagine what Rehoboam was going through. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying, which the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. It is sometimes when you see things that aren't like the favorite thing that you would want to see happening, or what you seem to think is happening, you might end up saying, I just can't restrain myself. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 19. This is the fulfillment of what we just read in 1 Kings chapter 11. So, in other words, this manner Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. Kingdom was divided. Jeroboam is the first king, and Rehoboam is the son of Solomon, and he's seeing the kingdom rent from him, and he is being told, this is of God. Happen. You know, folks, there is just so much that is involved here, so much that we don't really dig into, or nobody ever points it out to us. They just, when people, I have to tell you, I listened to some preaching, and it just amazes me that the individuals do teaching, they really don't have substance. They don't have any information that they're putting out. They just don't have any information that is guiding you, or that is set to change your life. You know, I sent one of the brethren a YouTube video on self-esteem. We're going to make it public here in a day or two, and it was done by Jeff Rowe, another friend of ours that is actually in Arizona right now going through treatment for return of cancer in his chest. And if you are a friend of What Does the Bible Say, then we appreciate you praying for Jeff Rowe. And Jeff Rowe works for Kennedy Space Center. He is a great speaker from the standpoint of putting together his thought process. He uses PowerPoint. He put together a lesson on self-esteem, and the response from the brother that I gave it to was, he changed my whole mind. Self-esteem. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 40. Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam. And Jeroboam rose and fled into Egypt, unto Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Remember what we were talking about a moment ago in reserve? How God works. What Ahijah told Jeroboam didn't come to pass right away. I don't know how Solomon ended up finding it out that Jeroboam had gone into or through this ordeal with Ahijah the prophet. I have no idea how that, and that's one of the things that I'll be looking at. You know, this is our second or third time to study Kings and Chronicles, and there are certain things now that interest me that I want to find out because they're life lessons. And I just know this, somehow or other it got out that Jeroboam was opposed to Solomon. I don't know if it was told. I don't know if he told his family members, none of that. But I do know this. Solomon sought to kill him, even though Solomon was told that this is going to happen to you. Rather than repent,
this is what he did. He tries to kill the individual that is said to be the one that's going to take the kingdom from him. What exactly the response that Saul had? Saul knew that David was going to have the kingdom. And Saul knew that his son knew this as well. And so what was his response? Oftentimes he was angry with his son, Jonathan. And at other times he was chasing David, trying his very best to kill him. Can you think with me just for a minute? Why do we fight God? I'm saying, think about, again, the person who's talking to you. Why is it that when somebody goes through the process to get information together, I hope that's what I've done this morning, this afternoon. I hope that the way that we're presenting this information is creating an interest level in you and also causing you to realize, you know what, I do need to maybe work on some of these rough edges, and I do need to be more spiritual. I need to offspring, life decisions that I'm making could alter their trajectory for no telling where they could actually be, but honey, notice individuals who actually have the information from God and their psyche such that even knowing that God said it himself, they still end up trying to do God. Now, you know, it doesn't have to be someone like Solomon or a Saul to end up doing that. There is a process that takes place as we start fighting with our own passions. There's a process that is taking place that is a very difficult mechanism, and it is the actual mechanism that Satan has been using since the very beginning. You know a thing, you're being told that a thing isn't good for you, and somehow or other, the mechanism that actually is our body, our physical makeup, convinces us we ought not to trust God. And it's a very, very normal process. And this afternoon, we're looking at this. Can you imagine Solomon trying to kill this individual? And look at the reserve. He goes down to Egypt, and there's Shishak, who is willing to take him in, and he lives there until the death of Solomon. Notice this, 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 1. You know, the same reserve that God uses and at the same time be the means by which he's punishing. He's helping one person with one thing, and he's punishing another, with the same thing. And it came to pass when Rehoboam had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. And it came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had transgressed against the Lord. Shishak is actually housing, he is a reserve, a help to one family member of Jacob, which basically we're talking about Jeroboam. He is actually a haven for that particular individual, and at the same exact time, he is over here going to be a corrective element to the son of Solomon. Now, what I see from this, I see God using a entity to actually help one this way, and the same entity help this one another way. And I'm basically trying to put that in. I'm trying to process that when I think about what's going on in the world around us. For instance, you think about the political parties and the things of that nature. You know, it could very easily be the case that we are just grinding. I'm saying our teeth are grinding. We're beating our head. We're driving ourselves crazy, listening to the constant rattle of the news media. And in fact, we don't realize that God is using the same element or the same entity to get things done. One, he's doing one thing to one group of individuals, and he's doing another to another group of individuals. And guess what? It's what both of them need. So are you saying Joe Biden is what we both need? I'm not saying anything about Joe Biden. I'm asking you to consider. Shishak is helping Jeroboam. That is actually helping God accomplish his end desire, or his end, his aim, to try to get them to straighten up over in Judah. And Shishak comes in, the very same entity comes in, and he is helping, or what he's trying to do is help them to change as well. Notice what happens. He comes in against them because they had transgressed against the Lord. 2 Chronicles chapter 12. Now remember what we said. Sometimes you have to look at a bigger version of Judah, and you do that by going to Chronicles. Sometimes you're not going to get the information out of Kings that you get out of Chronicles. So we basically were just saying there for a moment, and so Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. You ended up getting the information about how the kingdom divided. Here you're getting information about how Solomon's son is doing and how God is going to change them for the good. Notice this. Then came Shimei. Man, these speaking prophets. Then came Shimei, the prophet to Rehoboam, and the princes of Judah that were gathered together at Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said unto them, Thus saith the Lord, you have forsaken me, and therefore have I also left you and the Shishak. You know, you would think that as a result of the fact that Solomon did what he did and the things happened to Solomon that are happening because he knows it, Rehoboam knows it, Shimei said, okay, let it happen. Let Jeroboam take the 10 tribes. It's of God. It's a result of what's taking place as a result of your dad having all these different gods, all this worship that's going on in Jerusalem. You know Rehoboam knew about it. He may have been very young, but you know he knew about it. This is a life choice your dad has made. He is going to suffer for it. So this is the way it's going to happen. So Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. Now you have him, and he's basically seeing Shishak, and it's because he's doing the same thing. Thus saith the Lord, you have forsaken me, therefore have I also left you in the hand of Shishak. In the beginning, in the first 3 years, Rehoboam was doing better. But as he strengthened himself, you know, I heard that phrase before. He strengthened himself. Ahijah, one of the kings of Israel, has strengthened himself. He ended up getting raised up to the point in his own mind that he decides he's going to do the priest's work, and he turns into a leper. See how this works? Now you ask yourself, is it good to be in control, or is it good to be in a situation where almost grovel, get by? Well, where would you go to answer that question? Well, here's an unlikely place to go. And it's also a place that I might encourage you to consider how God worked in the life of Solomon. I haven't condemned Solomon yet. You notice that? I have read the information about Solomon, and I've watched Solomon being punished. But I haven't made a judgment about Solomon. And you may have been wondering, well, when am I going to do that? Now, Proverb, and it just slipped my mind. Give me that which is sufficient or convenient for me. You know, sometimes we think that we're in control and we want to be in control, and we ask ourselves the question, would we be better off if we were actually groveling when we want telling? Proverb 30 or 31? 30. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. Now, did you see what were we asking ourselves? These individuals that were strengthened, and all of a sudden you think, good, because you're strengthened, you're in control, you got this. Is that really the good way? Is that the time when you can let your guard down, or is that the time when you should really paying attention? Well, the person who has the answer to that is Solomon. Some of the things that Solomon did are very, very valuable. Then came Shimei, the prophet, to Rehoboam, princes of Judah, and gathered together Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said unto them, Thus saith the Lord, you have forsaken me, therefore I have left you in the hand of Shishak. Notice 1Kings chapter 12, verse 25. At the same time as this is going on, Jeroboam is building Shechem in Mount Ephraim, and dwelt there, and went out from thence, and built Penuel. Rehoboam basically is strengthening himself. He's doing well. And all of a sudden, he begins to forsake the Lord. Jeroboam is back from Egypt. Things are going well. He is in charge of the 10 tribes, and he starts building Shechem in Mount Ephraim. Now, one of the things I want to basically ask individuals to do is I want to ask you, as far as your homework is concerned, I want to ask you to start studying, start paying attention to the places that the 10 tribes of Israel end up elevating. And then you ask yourself this question. This is what you're trying to find out one way or the other. Are they elevating, is Jeroboam and individuals that are following Jeroboam, are they elevating places that the family Israel would actually be akin to, that they would have some affinity toward? Say, for instance, Shechem or Bethel, things of that nature. Those are places that end up being in the book of Genesis, places that Jacob was involved in, and places that would have a comfort for these individuals, because Jeroboam is trying to take them off. And in order to do that, you have to actually keep people comfortable to a certain degree. 1Kings chapter 12, 29. And he set the calf, that's what the subject is, he set the one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Bethel is a major place when it comes to the life of Jacob, the children of Israel. They're very, very familiar with Bethel. Very, very familiar also with Shechem, as a result of the fact that the tent, the older tent, and some of the holy items have been in Shechem at one point or other, and in Shiloh. So notice this, 2 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 13. And the priests and the Levites that were in all Israel resorted to him out of all their coasts. Levites left their suburbs and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 13. Now, I don't know if you're paying attention as we're going through the chronology here, but 2 Chronicles chapter 12, Shishak is about to come in on these individuals because of the fact that they're not being faithful. Just prior to this time frame, these individuals, as a result of Jeroboam putting a calf in Dan and Bethel, individuals that are in the land of Israel under the kingship of Jeroboam, they're actually making an exodus. And they're coming into the land where Rehoboam is. You know, folks, when we start talking about decisions that you make and how things can turn out, it is very, I just don't even know how to stress how important it is to make sure that you do your study, that you plan in advance. Individuals who are like changing jobs, and you basically go into an area to make more money, do you actually really look at the church when you talk about going to everybody? I heard the other day that 13,000 people a day are moving into Florida. Now, I don't disbelieve that what that person said. I wonder if, in fact, they did have their stats correct. There's a person who generally trusts what they say. 13,000 people moving to Florida every day. Can I ask you something? I know Florida has nice weather, and I know that there's a lot to be said about Florida as far as finances and things of that nature, but when you're talking about church, is Florida really the place to be? You know, if you're thinking about moving and you're a member of the Church of Christ, you might want to actually think about moving somewhere where spiritual activity is taking place. You'll be encouraged, you'll be uplifted. This is right in the context. Caleb and I both talk about this a lot. We have individuals, actually on the 3rd of March, we should have another individual that's moving here should arrive here from Mesa, Arizona. Kind of an oddity that has happened. Jeff Rowe is actually in Mesa, Arizona, having treatment for his cancer. And we have a brother in Christ that is coming from Mesa on the 3rd to be with us here in Virginia. Why? Well, I know, for instance, that individual has looked at us very closely. How do you do that from all the way from Mesa? Well, what they did, he and 2 others, they came to a tent, an evangelistic meeting for 2 weeks. Now, I don't want anybody to repeat this and repeat it wrong, but you know, the Queen of Sheba heard about what Solomon was doing, and she made a trip. And once she made the trip and saw for herself, she said, the half has not been told. There are individuals that come to our 2-week evangelistic meeting, and that doesn't mean they stay the whole time, but they come, and what they're doing is they're actually seeing if half has been told or the truth has been told, and some of them are finding out, you know what? It was better than we dreamed. We could not have imagined what takes place in this area. Do y'all have trouble? Sure, we have trouble. What are some of the things that y'all are doing? Well, we're trying to get the gospel out, and you're actually listening to a broadcast that is a result of what we're doing. These individuals couldn't worship correctly. They didn't have priests. Jeroboam was making priests from every different individual, all the tribes. If you could come up with a particular, like a calf or something like that and come in, he would make you a priest. And the priests and the Levites that were in all Israel resorted to him out of all their coast. For the Levites left their suburbs and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem. For Jeroboam and his sons had cast them off from executing the priest's office unto the Lord. You know, remember what we said a moment ago about Rehoboam? He strengthened himself. Rehoboam was doing well as a result of the first 3 years of his reign. And all of a sudden, he forsook God. Are your possessions, I'm saying, just think about this. You don't have to do this. There are U-Hauls around here or whatever. But you don't have to do this. But can I tell you this? The individuals that are coming here lately, they sell everything. That's pretty much keeping them in the place where they are. My neighbors did bring a van of some sort, but they didn't have a lot of stuff in it. They surely didn't have all the stuff to fill up their house. We have stuff here in this area that you can basically get to replace the things that you have, and you know, who knows, you might want to trim down a little bit anyway. And these folk right here are our examples. This is what to do when you can't be spiritually taken care of. And he ordained him priests for the high places and for the devils and for the calves which he had made. And after them, out of all the tribes of Israel, such as set their hearts to seek the Lord God of Israel, came to Jerusalem to sacrifice unto the Lord God of their fathers. Our lesson started today with me asking this question. What do people do when they're being? Solomon was being told, you know, Solomon, you're really not in good shape in the things you're doing. They're not accomplishing anything pleasing God. And Solomon just continued on. What if we're asking you the same question? Are you really growing as a Christian where you are? Is the congregation where you are? Do you have a preacher that encourages you to be evangelistic? I actually have a task that I haven't been able to accomplish just yet. Caleb and I were together in Florida on Saturday last week, and my goal is to listen to the memorial service again and count the amount of times different individuals said the word evangelism associated with this man. His name was Guy Dickinson, 93 years old. He's been a friend of mine for 31 years, supported me for 31 years, helped in getting the church established here in Martinsville, Virginia, and has helped in many different efforts. And I would be surprised if the word evangelism was not mentioned 50 plus times, maybe even way more than that. One of the things that was constantly said about him is he was very evangelistic. And I'm just simply asking, what do you want to be said at your memorial service? What was the character, the defining character, the defining characteristic of your life? A lot of things. You just think right quick with me. Kinds of stuff that doesn't really have anything to do with final destiny. These individuals set their heart to seek the Lord God of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem to sacrifice unto the Lord God of their fathers. I can tell you this. We're going to be trying our best. If you are setting your sights on us, we're going to be trying our very best to make sure that we don't get you off into something. 2 Corinthians chapter 12:1, it came to pass when Rehoboam established the kingdom and strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. We're doing well here, but we are actually groveling to a certain degree. I'm not saying that in a way that we're murmuring in any kind of way. Sometimes, you just, as Solomon said, give me that which is convenient for me, because I don't want to get to the point where we have so much that we actually don't trust God. We don't feel like we need God anymore. It came to pass that he was established and he forsook the law of the Lord. Just how bad did he get? 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 24. I don't know that this is actually recorded in Chronicles. I would just put this particular part together at the end of my study period. 1 Kings 14:24, and there were also Sodomites in the land, and they did according to all the abomination of the nations which the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. You might be thinking that I'm going back to Jeroboam. But in fact, this is a statement that is being made about Rehoboam. In the time frame of Rehoboam, the time frame that Shishak is coming to present himself in the land of the city of Jerusalem, they're actually having Sodomites in the land and doing the abominations that people that were cast out did. In 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 2, and it came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had transgressed against the Lord. Then came Shimei, the prophet, to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah that were gathered together to Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said unto them, Thus saith the Lord, you have forsaken me, and therefore have I also left you in the hand of Shishak. Notice, I have to get this passage up for you. 2 Chronicles chapter 12, the next verse. 2 Chronicles chapter 12. Whereupon the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, The Lord is righteous. And when the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shimei, saying, They humbled themselves, therefore I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out upon Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Homework. I'm hopeful that you are actually getting to see how God is. Right in the middle of one of the worst statements that you could hear, that there were Sodomites in the land, and these individuals were involved in the abominations of the nations which were cast out before the children of Israel. You've gone right back to what was going on when God basically made it possible for you to come into the land. And they humbled themselves. Basically, God gave them some space. I hope that we are learning about God. This is the way God is. We can humble ourselves regardless of the life decisions that we've made and the goals that we set. We can change those things around, and we can humble ourselves, and we can expect God to give us some space. This afternoon, as far as homework is concerned, I want to remind you again that these books are actually running concurrent, as we said. 1 Kings chapter 12, 2 Chronicles chapter 12. While you're reading about Rehoboam and Shishak in 2 Chronicles chapter 12, and you hear Shimei talking to him, next time we get together, we're going to actually see what ends up happening to Jeroboam and what's taking place in Bethel as a result of what he's doing over there. And again, we're going to be involved in a non-right prophet. I want you to read ahead. 1 Kings chapter 13, 1 Kings chapter 14. Make sure that you're ready for the actual lessons. Now, it's been my experience that when somebody teaches this particular segment, you would have basically heard all about the calves. You would have heard all about the non-writing prophet in chapter 13 of 1 Kings, and you wouldn't have got all of the details that we're trying to bring out, the life lessons that we're trying to bring out. Now, it's 2:45, and our YouTube audience, we're going to time out for you all, and we're basically going to ask you to tune in again tonight at 8 p.m. I believe Caleb did a live show in the Martinsville venue last night, and that same venue will get the same program actually over in North Carolina. So we'll have something that we've already prepared for folks on YouTube tonight at 8 p.m. We hope that you'll join us, and we also hope that you will tell someone about the broadcast, about our school, that you'll tell a friend about our YouTube channel, and that you'll get in touch with us, whatever we can do